The gold standard for reptile keeping back in the day was 10 gallons for everything, but now we know 10 gallons works for next to nothing. But not actually nothing. There are 5 reptiles that can spend their whole life in a 10-gallon enclosure, and today, we're going to talk about it. My name's Adam, this is Diamond, you're watching Wickens Wicked Reptiles, stick around. So I'd like to say, keep in mind, I prefer bigger enclosures. So do your research first and just beware, because there are still care guides out there that say a corn snake can live in a 10-gallon, which is less than 10% of the space they actually need. Anyway, let's go through this. And this is all animals that can live forever in a 10-gallon, right? So no need to upgrade. Number 5, pygmy chameleons. Pygmy chameleons are the coolest. They're about the size of like one of your fingers, basically. They don't have that long curly tail that you're used to. They're not vibrantly colored. They don't hang out in the canopies or even really in the middle. They're gonna hang around closer to the forest floor. You're gonna find them on branches and sticks and things like that. But the reason they don't have that curly tail is they don't need it like chameleons usually do, that spend a little bit more time up in the air, in the air, like they're airplanes, up in the trees. Pygmy chameleons are tiny. We're talking about like 3.5 inches, something like that. And along with all chameleons, they do have a pretty short life, so these things get to sexual maturity very quickly. I want to bring that up because a lot of these are brought in from Africa, where they're from, and that's how they're sold. So I would recommend, if you get one, if you want a pygmy chameleon, and why wouldn't you, I recommend getting someone who is captive bred. You're gonna pay more money for a captive bred animal, but you're not giving incentive for more animals to be taken out of the wild. Captive breeding is the way of the future. It's how we're going to save species that are endangered or might become endangered one day in the wild. Now, these are tiny chameleons, so they're not going to be as flashy as a panther or a veiled or a Jackson or anything like that. But what they lack in color, they make up for in cuteness. They are adorable. Their faces almost look like they have like this little look about them. I just think that they're fantastic. I think they're going to jump up in popularity, and you can keep them in something that is basically a 10-gallon. Give them some room lengthwise, give them some height also, but they're not going to be up in the trees, not going to be as arboreal as other chameleons. Number 4. We're going to talk about an amphibian, just to ruin the list right off the bat, glass frogs. Now, glass frogs come in several different species. You're going to find most of them in Central America. We found some when I was in Costa Rica. We found granulateds and valerii. There's a bunch of different ones, and I think that they're beautiful. Now, the reason that glass frogs are called glass frogs is because certain species have a translucent underside, and even translucency on their hind legs sometimes. Why? No one really knows. Although there have been studies that show that birds are more likely to take animals that are not as translucent as the ones that are translucent. But anyway, this is not a sciencey channel. I'm way too dumb for that. Let's just talk about why they're cool pets. They are arboreal. So you want to stick these things in an enclosure that's maybe, I don't know, 12 by 12 by 18, which is technically an 11.22 gallon enclosure, but we're going to call it a 10, or take a 10 gallon and flip it. There are companies that make conversion kits so that you can stand it up, but they do need height. They're going to need height. Now, if you want to keep more than one, which is something I would recommend, doing your research on how to do it properly first, then you'd want something bigger. But if you're only keeping one or maybe 2, you can do a 10. Again, I recommend bigger. I think it'd be way more fun. You're gonna enjoy it more. You can plant it better. But if you have a 10 gallon and you're dedicated, I'm gonna stick something in it, a glass frog would be great. They make beautiful, almost cute type of chirping call sounds. They're not loud enough that they're going to keep you up at night, most likely, unless you're a very light sleeper. Also, they're adorable. Something that you'll find with smaller animals is oftentimes they're really, really cute, and glass frogs are definitely no different. Number 3, chameleon geckos. Now, there are several species. I'm really lucky. I'm friends with Mike Taitula. If you haven't seen his channel, I recommend you follow it. He's got, I think, all of the species except for the most common one, but they are just really interesting. To me, they almost look like crocodilian-esque, just like the way that they're scalation. Not that they're related in any way, shape, or form, and maybe you don't think so. They look non-gecko-y, and they definitely don't look like chameleons to me, but the thing is, they're small, and they can live in 10-gallon enclosures if you keep them by themselves. Again, an upright enclosure, not one of the long ones, something that is upright, 12 by 12 by 18, something like that. And if there is a way to cohab them, of course, do your research on how to do that first, but you would want to get a bigger enclosure if you were to do that. So I think that you're probably better off with a bigger enclosure, but you definitely could stick them in a 10. They're very interesting. They're quick, but not super quick. I mean, you can handle them. I wouldn't say it's the best handling thing in the world. Now, these animals do need UVB, so keep that in mind. And on a 10-gallon, a linear UVB can be difficult, so you might want to share a UVB from multiple 10 gallons like I do up here, right? Now, these guys are omnivorous. Omnivorous means that they're going to eat anything that's a plant matter and insects. Now, these guys specifically will eat insects, so small crickets, even fruit flies when they're really young, things like that. Again, not a care guide. Do your research if you get one. And also fruit mixes. So what I've seen in the past is people using kind of like a prepared diet and feeding them insects. And to me, that's just interesting. It's kind of a similar type of way to care for crested geckos. Not saying it's the exact same, but similar enough where it's not too much of a departure. If you've already had something like a crested gecko, you could learn how to take care of a chameleon gecko, and they look very, very different. Just before the next one, a quick thank you to Into the AM, one of my favorite clothing brands. You guys make the most comfortable clothing with the coolest designs on them. I've got literally 20, 30 of these shirts, and people ask me everywhere I go, hey man, where did you get your shirt? Because they are so cool. And right now, these graphic tees, if you use the code below, the link below in the description, are only $54 for 3 shirts. And there's so many designs, like just so many, and they're so comfortable. Into the AM, go to the link below, $54 for these shirts, 3 of them. Can't go wrong. Number 2, I can't do a reptile list and not include a snake, but it's difficult because not many snakes can live in 10 gallons, but blind snakes can. Now there are a bunch of different ones, Brahmani, I'll never be able to pronounce it.
Brahmani.
This type of blind snake definitely can. They're called flower pot snakes a lot of the time because that's how people think that they were transported around the world. These animals are not supposed to be in Florida, California, Hawaii. Like, they're everywhere, but they're everywhere because they're invasive. The good news is they don't really cause too many problems being invasive, right? There are animals that will destroy whole ecosystems. Blind snakes, you probably think it's a worm when you pull it out of the ground. It's interesting because they have these tiny little mouths, so they do have a tongue and it does flick, but unless you look at them magnified, you'd almost never be able to see it. And they do have eyes. So they look like worms if it's like this far away, but if I put it really close to you, you definitely see that it's the funkiest looking worm you've ever seen. Now these guys sometimes are as short as 5 inches, can get all the way to 12, but that's pretty uncommon. The unique part about them is that they're not gonna eat rodents, obviously, so you're gonna have to do your research and figure out how to find their natural food sources or the food sources in captivity. I don't think they really make the best pets, simply because you'll never see them. They're gonna be fossorial, means they burrow into the ground, into the substrate. So you could have something that's cool and planted. I love planted enclosures, but they don't really work that well with heavier bodied snakes because the heavier bodied snakes will destroy the plants. If you want a blind snake in an enclosure, you'll see it sometimes. It'll help clean up the enclosure actually too, and you can have a beautiful planted enclosure and you'll probably never see this animal. Yeah, I don't really know why you'd keep one unless you're like really into the species. I don't really want to keep one, but they can definitely live in a 10-gallon their whole entire life. And number 1, dart frogs. Okay, they're not reptiles. I know, they're amphibians. And normally I try to ruin a reptile list with one amphibian, but we're 10-gallon enclosures. I have to struggle here, guys. Don't keep things in 10-gallon enclosures for the most part. I recommend bigger. I do have some of my dart frogs in 10-gallon enclosures, babies that are growing out. And sure, you could keep a pair in a 10-gallon, likely if you kept a smaller species, if you kept like thumbnail dart frogs, maybe even some pumilios, but I would recommend something bigger. What I do is I keep some of mine in 18 by 18 by 18 cubes. I've got this really beautiful planted enclosure, and this is a 36 by 18 by 2 feet tall. So I like them in bigger enclosures because you can plant them more elaborately. They're gonna move around like all the time, right? They're like Skittles that jump, that's what I always say. So it's gonna be more fun for you to look at. But if you only have space for a 10-gallon and you really do want something bright and beautiful, there are a lot of thumbnail dart frogs, right? The Retitomea. People tell me I mispronounce it. Anyway, that do work. They definitely would work. And depending on the species, you might even want to give them a little bit of space up top. I've seen my pumilios or even my leucomellas, which I don't recommend keeping in a 10-gallon, climbing quite a bit. So again, do your research. There's a video right here all about dart frogs. different species and things like that, but you definitely can keep dart frogs in a 10 gallon. It's just up to you to make sure you're doing it the right way. With that, I want to say thank you so much for hitting the like and subscribe button. It changes the way this channel is broadcast to the community and helps us get our message out to more people, which is that reptiles are awesome. Let's discover reptiles together. As always, a special thanks to the Patreon supporters. You guys are freaking amazing. I can't do what I do without you guys. Anyway, you get extra content, discounts on the merch, even though this isn't a WWR merch item. You get videos early, extra videos, the whole thing for as little as $1 a month, and that's it. Because I do videos twice a week, that means that I'll see you on Monday or Thursday. Next week. I'll see you next week.